Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 28-year personal injury lawyer, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury related. Well, with St. Patrick's Day celebrations kicking off this weekend, you know what that means? Parades, pints, and plenty of fun. But with all the excitement comes a fair share of risk, especially when alcohol, big crowds, and busy streets are involved. So today we're diving into the intersection of St. Patty's Day festivities and personal injury law right here in Missouri. From drunk driving accidents to slip and falls at packed bars and even parade float mishaps. Yes, it happens. We'll break down the legal side of these common scenarios, what Missouri law says, and how you can stay safe while still enjoying the shamrock-filled fun. So grab your green beer, responsibly, of course, and let's get into it. Now, in Missouri, and especially around Kansas City here, there are quite a few opportunities to get out and celebrate St. Patrick's Day. There are annual parades, there are bar crawls, and usually there's a lot of other events going on. Now, usually these are festive activities. Everybody is in theory out to have a good time, but as with everything, when alcohol gets mixed into it, there is a risk that becomes apparent. And on St. Patrick's Day, well, it's no different. Luck can only get you so far. And, you know, there's going to be alcohol consumption. There's going to be crowded spaces, lots of people together. And again, there's going to be parades involved. And all of these things can lead to problems arising that can lead to personal injury. So right off the bat, number one biggie is, of course, drinking and driving. We've talked about it here several times on the podcast, and St. Patty's Day is going to be a biggie for people to potentially get behind the wheel of a car after they've been drinking. And so it's obviously a really good time to be thinking about a plan of action for that day so that you can enjoy the day and not have to worry about potential aftermath of drinking and driving. Another big thing can be slip and falls. And there can be slip and fall accidents in crowded bars. You know, when people are drinking, there's liquid, there's food, those things get on the floor. And the next thing you know, there's a slippery, hazardous condition on the floor in these public spaces or these retail restaurants and bars. And those can lead to a potential personal injury. Now, unfortunately, when alcohol, again, is in the mix and there's a lot of people, assaults or fights in bars and public places are surely to break out. And so another potential area that somebody could run into a personal injury would be getting assaulted by someone, which not only would be a criminal matter, but they very well might have a personal injury claim against the person that assaulted them. Or if we're thinking next level, they could even potentially have an injury claim against an establishment if they knew they were going to have large crowds drinking, and they failed to provide adequate security and safety measures for the people that were at the bar. So finally, we have the fact that many people are going to be out on foot. They're going to be pedestrians. And that in and of itself is going to expose people to potential dangers. And again, whether that is coming into contact with a dangerous condition of property or potentially getting hit right by a vehicle, or in the weird and wild world of St. Patrick's Day, people have been known to get hit by parade floats. And so there's a lot of danger there when people are outside, they're walking around, they can encounter numerous different possibilities of getting hurt and suffering personal injury. So just to kind of summarize Missouri and personal injury law and what it looks like to potentially have a claim if you're hurt on St. Patrick's Day. Again, if we break down the various risk areas that I just discussed, obviously, if somebody hits you and they're under the influence and they're driving a vehicle, you have a claim for them. And, that's based on the failure to exercise the highest degree of care in the operation of a motor vehicle, which is the standard by which all drivers of vehicles in Missouri are held to be civilly liable if they cause personal injury. So that's pretty straightforward. Somebody hits you, you have a claim. Then with slip and falls, of course, you have to prove that if, again, you come into contact with a dangerous condition, and whether that's outside on the sidewalk, in the street, inside a bar, inside a restaurant, wherever it may be, you're going to have to prove that the dangerous condition was something that the property owner knew about or could have known about, and they failed to either remove it, barricade it, or warn of it. And because of their failure, it led to the type of injury that was sustained. So that is, in a nutshell, what you have to prove to hold a property owner responsible if you encounter some condition on their property and it causes you injury. Obviously, assaults and fights, things of that nature, this gets really hard because an assault or something of that nature where somebody attacks you, causes physical harm to you, and it is of an intentional nature, that is not just as simple to get a recovery against them. Now, by the letter of the law, it's pretty simple because it's an intentional tort. And all that means is they've intentionally caused you harm. And so by the letter of the law, you can sue them, you can get a judgment against them, and you can recover for the damages that you sustained because of the injuries this person caused you. Now, again, that's the easy part. That's the letter of the law. The hard part is ever getting money from somebody in this situation. So because it's intentional, there's no insurance coverage for an assault. So if somebody attacks you, beats you up, whatever that looks like, there's no insurance coverage for that. So now you're just having to go after what they personally own, what their personal worth is. And the even larger problem with that is, let's say they have some money and you go get a judgment against them. Well, if it's not enough to cover your situation and cover the other obligations they have in the world, then you're going to run into a situation where they're going to file for bankruptcy, and more than likely the judgment you have against them is going to go away. Now, there are some exceptions there, and you might be able to hold on to a judgment, but then you're going to have to most likely either try to execute on the judgment, sell their assets, garnish their wages, things like this. There is no simple A to B route to get a recovery in a situation where somebody has assaulted you. All right, let's turn to pedestrian accidents. In order to recover as a pedestrian, again, if you're walking and somebody hits you with their car, it's the same scenario as the drunk driver. The person operating the vehicle has to exercise the highest degree of care in the operation of that vehicle. But here's the question. Were you in a crosswalk, or were you somewhere in the street you weren't supposed to be? During St. Patty's Day festivities, there are people everywhere and they're not always where they're supposed to be. So, be mindful if you're out and about and you're on foot, obey the traffic laws for pedestrians. Do everything you can to protect yourself. And if for some reason something happens, you have a legal foot to stand on because you were where you were legally entitled to be. That's a big deal. Because again, if you're in the middle of the street and somebody hits you, you're not necessarily protected. It'll depend on, how much ability they had to avoid you and things like that. But you can't just be in the middle of the street and expect to be fully protected by the law if somebody hits you and causes you injury. Now, one thing I think we should address here for just a second is the idea of comparative fault in Missouri and what that looks like, especially on a day where you, the person that gets injured, might have some fault. So what do I mean by that? Well, again, you may be one of the party goers. You may be enjoying yourself. You may be drinking alcohol. All of these things may come into effect. You may not be paying as close attention as maybe you should have been, or you would normally be if you, again, weren't caught up in the festivities of the day. So in Missouri, the fault of the person making the claim can be compared to the fault of the person the claim is being made against. And essentially, you can look at it as a spectrum of from 0% to 100% fault. And by all of this, I mean 0% of the fault could be placed on the person that is having the claim made against them, or 100% of the fault could be put on them. Or there can be a split of the fault between the two parties, between the party that the claim is being made against and the party that is making the claim. So let's say it got all the way to a jury trial. Let's say it's a pedestrian accident. Let's say the pedestrian was not in a crosswalk. They were outside the crosswalk, but there is an argument that the driver should have seen them and should not have hit them. In that instance, a jury could very well put the fault at 50-50, 50% on the driver of the vehicle, 50% on the pedestrian. And then the way all that shakes down is if the jury finds that the injured person, the person making the claim, sustained damages and they put a dollar amount on it, the judge will reduce the dollar amount the jury awarded by the percentage fault the person making the claim had. So very easy number example, $10,000 verdict, jury verdict. The jury says the person making the claim is 50% at fault. The judge is going to reduce the $10,000 to a $5,000 award. So again, just be really mindful about your actions when you're out there not contributing to your own injury and problems, because again, you are responsible for yourself and for making sure you're taking good care and you're trying to avoid injury as well. So just be careful out there, but it can also impact you legally if for some reason you get hurt and you are going to make a claim against somebody else. So just keep all of that in mind. So what are some great ways to safely celebrate? Obviously, get a designated driver. I've said this before on other podcasts where we talk about drunk driving. In today's world, there is simply no reason for anybody to get behind the wheel of a vehicle if they've been drinking alcohol. You've got friends, you've got Uber, Lyft, all of the options. It never needs to happen. And guess what? If you never get behind the wheel after you've been drinking, you're never going to cause an accident while drinking and driving. It's that simple. The other thing is this: choose the places you go to with some care. Again, I talked earlier about potentially holding an establishment responsible or a venue responsible. If you get hurt and it's because of something they didn't do, they didn't have adequate security, they didn't have adequate safety measures in place, maintenance procedures, whatever that looks like. So choose places and venues with good crowd control, trained staff. You see maintenance people around, keeping trash cleaned up, things like that. That is going to work to keep you safe on St. Patrick's Day. Now, if you are injured on St. Patrick's Day in some type of a situation like I've just talked about, and you think you might have some kind of a claim against somebody else for causing you that injury, right then and there, as best you can, you need to make sure evidence is preserved. So whether that is, getting pictures, if you fall, you think it's a dangerous condition, you make sure you're getting photographs, video, whatever that looks like. If it's a car accident, something of that nature, make sure you get the police involved, let them do their work, identify witnesses, make sure if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I saw that, whatever it looks like, you got their name, you've got their phone number. That kind of stuff could become crucial down the road if you decide that you have a claim against somebody else for your injuries and the damages that you've sustained. In the case notes to this podcast, we're going to put an article about a Lawrence, Kansas woman who was struck by a parade float. And again, right, you think it's something that just doesn't seem possible, but it can happen. And so again, just be mindful on St. Patrick's Day, have a lot of fun, but there is risk out there. Do everything you can to lower your risk so that the following day you had a great time and you're not dealing with the consequences. And so as always, I hope you guys are doing well. Be safe. And again, have a great St. Patrick's Day, and I'll see you on the next episode.